Welcome back to Refinitiv Perspectives Live. As you can see, we've made it to the 20th episode of our 24-hour live event. And joining us on this 20th episode is Sonya Dreizler, who is a consultant for Solutions with Sonya. So thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you today.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on the feat of making it so far. A few more hours to go.
Of course. And so for this episode, we're diving into the world of diversity and inclusion. So I know you usually talk about race and gender in the financial services, but since it's Inauguration Day, can you share your thoughts on the election of Vice President Harris and the significance of having a Black and Indian woman in that position of power?
Yes, absolutely. It's my pleasure. And first, thank you for having me on. It's really, I'm honored to be on here with you and all the other leaders you've selected to hear from. So thank you. So Vice President Harris, it's exciting to say. It's just huge to think about all the little girls and boys seeing a woman of color, specifically a Black woman, an Indian woman, in a position of power and in one of the highest positions of power in our country. It's really hard to imagine yourself in a role where nobody who looks like you has been before. And obviously, VP Harris is one of the people who was able to imagine it, envision it, and do all the hard work to get there. And so in becoming vice president today, she's really opened up a whole world of opportunities, imagined and real, for those that come behind her. And then another sort of takeaway that I got as I was watching and as I've been thinking about this since November is the key role that white men have to play. And white men are often who I'm speaking to in financial services because, like politics, financial services is run overwhelmingly by white men. And white men have a really huge opportunity to move the needle when it comes to representation and inclusion. Vice President Harris and many other women politicians have the skills and acumen to be president, and systemic inequities and barriers like fundraising and political campaigning are much harder for women, and especially women of color. And we see these same issues play out in business as women of color enter the finance and business world at about parity to their representation in the United States, like compared to the census. And then they become less and less represented as we look higher into the organizational structure. Happy to send, if it's useful to footnote, I have some studies I'm happy to send along that have that data. But like Joe Biden did with his selection of Kamala Harris as his running mate, white men can and must bring talented women into the decision-making rooms where they belong.
And it's so nice to see. I mean, we've been having this conversation obviously for years, but especially this year, I think it's become increasingly important as things like, the pandemic came out, and really we've just been more open to these conversations than ever. So it's been so interesting to see that finally the talk and the conversation has turned into action, and we've been able to actually have and elect a vice president who is a woman of color. So that's amazing.
Yes, and you're totally right. The conversations have opened up significantly even in the last year. I've been talking about race and gender in the business world for years, and only really last year, in the middle of the Black Lives Matter protests, and the sort of revealing of huge systemic and racial inequities and injustices in our country, were just last summer. So many people, business leaders, especially in financial services, of course, came to me to have conversations about, okay, so let's talk about race. How do I deal with this? Where does my business come in? This is important. And I wish those conversations had been happening sooner, but they're happening happening now, and I welcome them, and I'm really glad to see them happening more openly. I know that for most white folks, it is really hard to talk about race. It's something most of us have been raised not to talk about. And so, it's really good to see those conversations happening. And I am hopeful that those conversations are not ending with conversation, that they are moving to action.
Well, and I was going to ask, have you seen any action come from these conversations yet? Do you think it's still a lot of conversation and figuring out how to move forward? How has that looked, especially with your consulting?
Yeah, I have seen actions. I think it's easier the smaller the company. With just one person, you can make a decision and really start moving towards change. And when you have a larger organization, larger pieces, a larger bureaucracy that you're kind of managing, more people to consider, it is harder to change the direction of the ship. But I do see change. I see it at companies both large and small, and I hope that the larger companies continue to push internally for more and additional change, and that they're transparent about it, because in large companies, these are leaders for our industry, and other firms will look to them as well.
Yeah, that's something we talk about at Refinitiv a lot too with our ESG data, is just making sure, the transparency that is there so that those things can be noted and put into the data. But switching from politics to the business world, what can people and companies do to increase the numbers of women and people of color in leadership?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the big change is in systems. The problems are systemic, and so the big changes and the big shifts will be systemic, but there's a role for individuals too. In terms of systems, there's so many different systems and different reasons and intersecting reasons why women and people of color, and especially women of color, are left out at the higher roles in our organizations. And it really depends. It really varies from company to company which one. Usually hiring and retention are huge pieces of it. That's at almost every company, not just who are you hiring. It's usually sort of a step removed or a step behind that. Like who we usually hire from our own networks, and we post jobs in places we know, if we're even posting them, or we just tell people we know about the job or that we're considering hiring. And so who we know really influences who we hire, and each person in the company, each of us if we each have very homogenous networks, it leads to homogenous hires too. And so rethinking our networks and being really intentional about building more inclusive networks for a better business is one thing that individuals can do, and if everybody at a company does it, can have a huge impact. And then the other systems, it's harder to get into in a short call because there's so many, and
of course
vary from company to company. What issues are coming up? Is it harassment? Is it discrimination? Or is it just sort of obliviousness to the role that race and gender play in financial services? There are lots of things that people who want to be allies can do at any level, and the networking is certainly, the building an intentional network is a big one that I think applies to everyone. And I want to talk about the first couple of steps. I always talk about the 5 steps to building a more intentional network, and we don't have time for that today, but I'll talk about the first 2. The first one is to stop. Just stop, and just stop assuming that your lived experience is the same as other people's lived experience. To create a diverse and inclusive network, this is a mindset that you'll really have to change. Because when we think of our experience as the default experience, we don't see the hurdles that other people might have faced. And it's also harder for us to believe other people when they tell us about their experience if we're comparing it to our own, right? So I can elaborate there, but that's the short version. And then step 2 is listen. And I actually just recently posted on, I think we're live on LinkedIn here, right? I recently posted on LinkedIn something about doing a listening audit, because it's really important you think about who you listen to. Are you listening to people who are like you and sort of reinforcing your worldview, or are you intentionally expanding your network of who influences what you think about the world? So seek out women of color, especially Black women, and other people of color who readily share their experiences with bias and discrimination, so that you can learn what that looks like. And I say readily share because I want to stress it's not okay to just call your Black friend and be like, please educate me about racism in the United States. It's not their job, right? We can't ask or expect from underrepresented groups to like educate us on the oppression that they've experienced. So stop and listen are the other are the first two. I'll post an article when we get off of our call here with the other 3.
And that would be great, because we can always link it in the comments. So if you enjoyed that, you can see it in the comments below. But you are so outspoken on racism and sexism, and that's compared to what is typical in finance. So why do you think especially this is so important in an industry like the financial services?
Yeah, that's a question that I get a lot because it isn't typical to talk about these things. And God, the year before last, in 2019, I put out a series of essays, including about 40 stories of personal experiences of women in financial services and their experiences with harassment, assault, and discrimination at work. And it's something that so many women I know about and talk about, but we do not share it publicly. We don't share it publicly because it can be really detrimental to our career to talk about it publicly. It can be unsafe for us, physically unsafe or career unsafe for us to talk about it publicly. It can be lots of different reasons that we don't talk about it. Also because financial services has this like a culture of secrecy, right? And the culture of secrecy is there for good reason. We are tasked with taking care of our clients' assets and money, and it's really important that we are not sharing all of that information, but sometimes that culture of secrecy leaks out into other parts of the organization. And what can end up happening is that we stay quiet or we keep secrets for the people who are harassing and discriminating against employees because it's in our best interest to keep our jobs, or because it's scary to speak out. There's so many reasons that women, and I don't want to speak for people of color, but from what I hear, similar reasons, but they are not speaking out. And the reason that I speak out is because I am in a unique position. I work only for myself and of course, for my clients, but I'm not representing a bunch of other people. And so I have the opportunity to use my voice and my platform. People listen to me and what I have to say, and I am not beholden to a large corporation and what, like, walking a political line of what is acceptable to say. And so I want to use my platform for that, to speak out for all the women who cannot. And so that's how the series started, the Do Better series, where I talked about harassment and discrimination and assault. And then it just kept going. Once I started speaking out about financial services, I thought, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. This feels really important. And what has been great, I am certain that I have alienated people. There are people who do not like what I have to say on this. I know that. But what's been really great is being really open about my thoughts about race and gender and finance and where we can change and do better, because it's a great. It's a great industry to be involved in if, for a career and for changing people's lives. It's wonderful. And we should all be able to be a part. What I've found in being so outspoken about it is that clients are drawn to me and know, let me rephrase, the clients who are mission aligned are drawn to what I have to say, and they know what they're getting. They are not, they know who I am already because I've been using my voice so publicly, and this is something that they value too. And so I'm pulling in clients who are really, really mission aligned, and that work is wonderful and valuable and really rewarding.
Yeah, and it's so great to hear that you are helping open the doors and getting started on these conversations at different places because, like you said, this is such a great industry to be in. It's evolving, it's changing, it's fun and exciting. So to make sure that those doors are open for others to join is just so important. And we've seen through the data, our diversity and inclusion index, you perform better when you have the diversity and you're being inclusive as a business. So it's been so great to talk to you. Yeah.
It is good for business to include more people. And of course it is, right? Like if you think about it, it's going to be so much easier to serve more clients, a wider array of clients, if those clients and customers are getting products and services that make sense to them based on the decisions made by people like them inside of the company.
Of course. But it's been so great talking to you. We really appreciate you coming on to have this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to chat with you too. Take care.
Take care. If you enjoyed this episode, you can read a report on key factors driving workplace diversity and inclusion by scanning the code or clicking the link on the screen now. As always, thank you for joining us, and be sure to stay tuned for the next episode on the hour. And thank you for having us.